Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
I don't know about you, but I am so excited to touch and smell and feel brown grass. I think we've made it. I think we've made it through the winter, and we're on our way to a great spring. And I'm not nearly as excited as my guest this evening because he's brand new to the area and brand new to his new job. His name is Mark Bacciagalupi, and he is the area fish supervisor for the central Minnesota area. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much, Ray.
And now that you're brand new to the job, maybe you could just tell us real briefly what is that you do.
Sure. The Brainerd Fisheries area tries to optimize fishing for all of Crow Wing County and southern Cass counties, and a little chunk of Cass County that's over on the northern tip of Crow Wing County.
And roughly how many lakes are underneath your supervision?
Oh, there's 400 lakes in the area, of course, but really we actively manage 135 of them, and then 16 streams, including the Mississippi River and some trout streams. So
that's a lot of water. And it's really not possible to get to all of them, is it? I mean, and to do actual management things to all of those bodies of water.
Exactly. There's a limited amount we can do on all 400 of those. We concentrate on some priority areas and in areas where we can really come in and get some bang for the buck. Yeah.
There's a movement in the legislature through the Minnesota DNR to start looking at having probably a rise in the prices for fishing and hunting licenses. Would you want to just talk a little bit about what that is all about?
Sure. There is a need out there. Inflation has been eroding our ability to do our jobs over the last 10 years, and it's been about 10 years since the last major fishing license increase. It was in the governor's budget proposal, and the DNR worked with our commissioner on that subject matter. And we put together a thoughtful package, we think, of some increases that make sense in a lot of different ways. Some convenience packages to maybe bring in casual anglers that only buy licenses 1 out of 5 years, say, but also some just some new packages like a 90-day fishing license to capture maybe the types of people that aren't the diehards that fish all the time, and things like that. But just increasing the price arbitrarily was something we didn't want to do, because you lose licensed anglers that way too, and then you lose the ability to get federal matching dollars as well. So that was something we looked at too.
I know I looked at some of the research that your department has done, and in some states where there's been dramatic rises in the fees, as you alluded to, they've lost a lot of customers, haven't they? A lot of people did not buy licenses that next year. And dramatic could even be $4 or $5, let's just say for a family fishing license.
Right.
Which I think to a lot of the sports groups, that doesn't seem like a lot of money, but some people do view that as a lot of money and a reason not to buy that.
Right.
So how many people do you think, or what percentage of people do you think would probably be discouraged if the prices were to go up, say $5 or $6? Would it be significant?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of research that went into this, and so they looked at different pricing schedules and what the fallout would be. They know from other states that there is about a 5-year fallout when you increase the price, say, $10 or $15. So in some, we're proposing a $7 increase for the typical $17 fishing license to go to $24, and the study shows that raises the revenue you need, but you're not pricing out a lot of people that, and we don't want to do that either.
So now are you talking about just raising the license fees for like the single family fishing license? Are you talking also about fish houses, the license that would go on a fish house, the spearing license? Are you looking at pretty much across the board licenses that are associated with fishing?
Sure, we looked at pretty much We looked at pretty much everything. There's some new things in there. For instance, you used to have to buy a spearing license, and you used to have to buy an angling license if you wanted to be a spear fisherman in the winter. Now you can, if you choose not to want to angle during any part of the season, but just spear, you could just buy a spearing license, for example.
So you're going to have a little more flexibility in the licensing approach that
There's
you're going to use?
some flexibility there. We've added some new licenses for residents, for, say like a 3-day license or a 90-day license.
For residents?
For residents, whereas there were some of those options out there for non-residents before. But we're seeing where we could maybe be picking up some future outdoorsmen that were more casual before.
So if they were just going to jump in the lake and come to the Brainerd area for 4 or 5 days, and that's all they fish in a typical year, now they might have an now they will have an opportunity to buy a license for that.
Yeah, maybe they're in town for the weekend and would think, well, I'll just sit out while my buddies go fishing. Now, if the decreased license, maybe they'll buy that license and go out and become hooked for life, get really into it. That's a possibility.
Now, I know that your departments spent a fair amount of time getting input from other groups. And you've talked with a number of the angling groups, the Muskies Inc. and that sort of organization. What's the feedback you're getting from the groups around the state?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of positive support. Most folks out there, realize that it's really an increase that is a small part of their recreation dollar, a couple of gallons of gas or a couple of gallons of milk, a bag of groceries. So in the scheme of things, it's not a ton of money.
You said it's been 10 years since you've raised the licenses. That goes back to the Ventura governorship.
Yeah, 2001.
Yeah, and how have you gotten by all these years with no increase in revenue?
Yeah, we've tightened our belts over the years. We've made significant reductions in staff. Out of about 600 employees that we had 5 years ago, we're down 100, including 25 conservation officers that are already spread out over a pretty wide geographic area. And they're asked to do a lot of things. They're asked to enforce the ATV and snowmobile laws. They're asked to check hunters and fishermen for bag, what's in their bag, and you name it. They're assisting on just about everything out there.
What could the outcome be if this doesn't pass? What might happen?
We'd see a gradual erosion of the quality of hunting and fishing that we've come to expect in this state. I'm afraid to say. We'd have to, on my end in our fisheries office, just to give a quick example, we have 2 vacancies that we're just not expecting to fill for the indefinite future, and we'll be fine with that, but we'll have to do less surveys. We'll have less up-to-date information for the people that are interested in what's going on in their lake or favorite stream. We might not be able to get to do a habitat improvement project because we're stretched too thin. And ultimately, one of these, at some point, you can't stock all the fish that you used to stock or get to all the lakes to, monitor the things that are important to the citizens out there.
If you didn't get that approved at the legislature this year, you would have to come back, I would guess, in 2 years. That would be the next opportunity you would have to make a stab at it again.
Yeah, well, the 2012 legislative session would be a chance. I'm not a politico by any means, but people are saying that in an election years, it's harder to get things like this passed. And by 2014, the Game and Fish Fund will be in the red, and we can't deficit spend there like the federal government. We just have to simply plan to make serious cuts in the things that we do. We would have to be talking about whose office should we close and how would we shift people around to cover that, instead of planning our work, planning ahead to think about the projects that are out there to be done to improve hunting and fishing.
Well, you alluded a little bit to fish stocking. Let's just talk about stocking for a few minutes, because I think that's an area that just about everyone's interested in if they have any interest in fishing at all.
Sure.
And I know that there's a fair amount of fish stocking in the Brainerd Lakes area. And I know there's been a proposal this past year to do some muskie stocking. For a while there was talk about doing it in Gull Lake. Another period of time there was talk about doing it in South Lawn. And I know that the department has finally decided to do that area stocking in Roosevelt, which is up near Outing.
Yeah.
That's a pretty political area. You say you're not in politics, but you're going to be now in this job.
Yeah.
And how do you decide? Let's just talk about walleye fishing for a minute, because you don't really stock. I guess you probably stock walleyes and trout and muskies. Do you stock other fish too?
Those are the primary, the big ones. There's a lot less northern pike stocking that goes on in the state because they found they reproduce pretty well on their own. And stocking is meant to kind of support a fish species that is having trouble reproducing. That's the area that where it is most effective.
And how do you determine? Let's just say you go to Lake X, and there's a lakeshore property association that wants you to start stocking that lake. What kind of decisions do you have to make in order to determine if that will be a successful stocking?
Yeah, there's biological and physical criteria we can look at, and we've learned that by observing where it works in nature, in our 10,000 examples that we have out there, for the most part. But for example, walleyes we see obviously do well in larger lakes. Something about these larger lakes, the varied habitats that they have, and the wind-driven waves, action against shorelines to create sandy areas, and they're a bottom-loving species. If you fish walleyes, and you know that you fish them towards the bottom. So we look for those biological and physical characteristics of good walleye lakes, for example, or a good muskie lake, and we would carefully consider where we'd want to introduce species where they aren't already. If we don't think they're going to make it, we would rather save those dollars and use them somewhere else.
And I'm certain that one of the issues would be what the forage base is in a particular lake, because if you've got a lot of fish, they need something to eat.
Yeah, great point, Ray. A lot of studies out there show that perch are a really important forage base for a lot of species, but especially walleye. And you'd want to have a history of a good perch population, for example, in a place to go stock walleyes.
I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of talk about ciscos being depleted. And I remember the two lakes that were being talked about were Mille Lacs and Leech Lake, and that there was a huge drop in the cisco populations, which are pretty good forage base for larger fish, walleyes and muskies. And I've been reading that there's been an explosion in Mille Lacs of the last year or two of the cisco population again. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, Mille Lacs is out of my area a little bit, but I think you're right about that. And that's what I was about to say before you said there's an explosion, is that these things do run in cycles like that, and we observe some of these decreases, and before we push the panic button, we say let's keep an eye on things for a little while, because they typically come around on their own without any intensive action on our part.
I know one of the concerns was that the climate's changing, it's getting warmer, and warmer lakes don't support very large populations of ciscos. And this certainly hasn't been a warm winter, but the winters have probably been less of a factor than the summer times when it does get warm. 4 years ago, we had almost a week of 100-degree temperature, and it wasn't uncommon to see large walleyes floating on our lakes, ciscos. So that real warm temperature certainly can be a factor, can't it?
Yeah, and that's a subject matter that there's individuals in our fisheries research department that are looking at those things, and we have a large-scale monitoring program that's been underway for almost 4 years now, to really prepare ourselves with the right types of data on the subject of climate change.
One of the things that was really talked about last year a lot, and I don't know if you're connected to this issue at all, but there was a real movement to start moving the walleye production to the private sector, to get it out of the DNR's hands. And I never quite completely understood what that movement was about. Do you have any awareness of what that was about?
Yeah, there's been bills introduced in the legislature, I think, for the last few years regarding that topic. Yeah, the having the state privatizing some of the jobs that we do.
Is it
as
to
state
save money?
workers. I think that's an investigation that they'd like to do. I think that would be what a lobbyist for the aquaculture industry would say, is that they can do it cheaper.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we do a pretty good job of not just producing the product that we're doing, but also keeping in mind the variety of other things that go on, because most of our, for instance, walleyes and muskies, which is a big part of what we do, are actually raised in natural wetlands that are out in Minnesota, public resources, in fact. So they aren't just private ponds in a operator's facility or inside an indoor facility. We're dealing with public resources for the most part.
All the way around.
On this topic, yeah. So it's something we, I think we keep a pretty careful eye on.
There's probably no more emotional stocking than muskies. It seems to rise to a level of, really pro-muskie stocking people and people who don't do this to our lake. And I know that Tim Brastrup, your predecessor, dealt with a lot of emotional people talking about this from both ways, because the muskie groups, Muskie Inc. and the other kinds of groups, would like to see more muskies in more lakes to actually reduce the pressure that some of these lakes are feeling. And I know when it was brought up here about a year ago to stock Gull Lake, for example, boy, that brought people from all over into the discussion, which is what you wanted. I mean, the department wants those kind of discussions. But, the thing that you hear so often is that when muskies are introduced into a lake, they wipe out species, and then the lake's not balanced the way it was naturally. And how do you address that from your perspective?
Yeah, that is a real concern, and what I always tell folks is, why would we want to do that if that was the case? We have pretty good data that shows that doesn't happen. A real good study occurred that looked at the 42 lakes in Minnesota that we currently manage for muskies as stocked populations and not naturally occurring populations. And that data showed that after looking at the fish populations before we stocked muskies and looking at the fish populations after we've stocked muskies for a number of years, there are some ups and some downs in some species, but overall there are no differences. And in fact, in many cases, the increases in the species people like walleyes and bluegills and bass and crappies, those species are doing better than they were before.
Really?
Yeah.
And one of the primary forages for muskies would be panfish, I would guess.
Yeah, they will eat panfish. They like soft-rayed fish, like white suckers or cyprinids. In the southern part of the state, they'll eat freshwater drum or carp. They do kind of eat what they encounter, but when they're offered a choice, they like those soft-rayed fish like the Cisco. A lot of species that folks aren't as concerned about
That they're not eating, probably.
biting on their line.
Right,
to be
right.
honest, yeah.
Do you see any other stocking programs developing on muskies in your particular region?
Yeah, well, so as you know, Ray, we've been through a pretty lengthy process with the 5 lakes that we proposed statewide over 2010, essentially, and we're going forward with 2 of those 5 lakes, and I think we're going to just let the issue rest for a little while, for right now, and we'll have the work of stocking those new lakes and monitoring how those populations are coming along, and we can start to, we'll always take input on what people are thinking out there.
Sure.
But maybe in a couple of years we'll take up the issue of new lakes again.
So they start stocking Roosevelt this spring. How long will it be before those will be fish that will be fun to catch?
Yeah, some of the musky fingerling stocking occurs typically in the fall, even late October or early November. And so they're 10 to 12 inch fingerlings at that time. It can take about 8 or 10 years before those are, 40, 42, 44 inch fish. And now statewide we have a 48 inch minimum size regulation for muskies. So, those fish have been around a while by the time they're trophies like that.
So it is a long-term process when you stock a lake before it becomes producing trophies at least.
Sure, yeah, and I joked around that we should have been asking the 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds out there what they'd like to do in 10, 12 years.
Because then when they're fishing,
lakes.
That's where it'll be big
Yeah,
enough
and
to
they'll
keep.
they'll be in their formative years when those fisheries are really hitting their stride.
Let's just switch gears for a minute here, because I know you wanted to talk about lake management a little bit, and we're already down to about 8 or 9 minutes.
Oh.
But tell us a little bit about what you do in lake management. What does that mean in your particular area, and how do people get involved if they want to have some work done on their lake?
Yeah. Well, we take a science-based approach to this, Ray, and the way we go about lake management planning is that we have this baseline data for a lot of our popular lakes and streams, and we look at that data, analyze it for trends and tendencies, and what are the strengths and the weaknesses of this lake, and what are we able to tweak with the few tools that we do have in our tool belt. So surveys, so we have ongoing monitoring and surveys to see what are these fish populations looking like. And then, knowing what types of things have worked in the past as far as stocking and what types of regulations we might be able to impose to improve maybe the size of the fish that are out there. Using research that's gone on all over in this state and in other Midwestern states, using that type of data we propose a plan moving forward. And that part of the process where people can get involved and offer their insights. A lot of people call in and their first sentence is, "I've been fishing this lake for 30 years." And those are valuable insights. And also what we look for from people are, what would you like out of this fishery that you're not getting? I mean, we aren't always able to deliver because it's hard to fight Mother Nature sometimes if she doesn't want to.
So if you have a good bass lake, it's probably not going to be realistic that it's going to become a great walleye lake.
You got it. That's a real typical one.
Yeah.
Bass, panfish lakes, or lakes that have a lot of northern pike. It's hard to turn them into walleye lakes, and that is a frequent request.
So it would be, and certainly fishing pressure does have a lot to do with this. I don't think we always give ourselves credit for doing as much damage to some of these lakes by putting pressure on them as we do.
Sure, the humans are the best predators out there,
Right.
and we do a pretty good job of cropping down a species that is of interest in some way.
I think personally it's a great thing that you stock lakes. I know some people probably don't believe in that, but we have a lot of pressure in our area. And I think even sometimes catching 15 and 16 inch walleyes, for example, is a lot better than going out in the lake for 4 hours and not having a bite. So I think that, I think you're doing a good job in those particular lakes where you are doing the stocking. When you say we put an approved plan together, who does that plan go to?
Yeah, we receive input. Our different biologists chip in on the plan. I ultimately sign it out of our area office, and the plan goes all the way up the chain through in the Northeast region. The biologists in Grand Rapids check off on it, and ultimately St. Paul has policies and has done studies on the types of things that work and don't work, and they have input in if our plans fit in with an overall plan for the state, you know.
Let's just change the subject real quickly.
Sure.
Asian carp. Are we going to be able to stop them from coming up to the river?
With most things, it's hard to stop an invasive species forever. You can slow things down, and electric barriers or certain types of barriers can work. They're expensive. That's going to be a challenge moving forward. I think in the northern climate we have, I think there's some studies out there that show they're not going to thrive up here as they do in some of the bigger southern rivers.
But in all likelihood, eventually they're going to come up here, probably.
Perhaps. There's been a few years ago there was, I believe, one fish documented down in the Lake Pepin area,
oh, really?
I think, but they haven't seen another one then.
Wow.
So
that's good news.
yeah,
that's very good news. Yeah. Well, Mark, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they go about doing that?
Well, our area office number is pretty well known. You can always call in. We're in the phone book. mndnr.gov is, of course, on the internet is a good way to find numbers for any area office. A lot of people stop by because they know where the office is too, and that's fine.
Well, you're going to have an interesting job. And I know you'll do a great job because you have a lot of enthusiasm for it. So I wish you the very best of luck in this new position. And we didn't say where you came from, but you came from the Mankato area.
Yeah, I was
That's
most
right.
recently down in Mankato, and the family is transitioning up here now. It's an exciting time for us.
Well, welcome to Central Minnesota, and thank you very much for being on the program.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Ray.
it very much.
Yeah.
Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.